In this video, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most complex, most debated, and most disturbing timelines in all of gaming history. Five Nights at Freddy's. And I don't just mean the surface level stuff that everybody already knows. We are going deep. We are going all the way back to 1979, to a place called Murray's Costume Manor, long before Freddy Fazbear ever sang his first song, long before William Afton ever put on that spring Bonnie suit, long before the screams of children echoed through those dark hallways and never stopped. We are going to trace every murder, every possession, every lie, every cover-up, and every betrayal across more than 6 decades of fictional history. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand why so many people believe this timeline was never supposed to be pieced together at all. Because here's the thing about Five Nights at Freddy's. Scott Cawthon, the creator of this franchise, never handed anyone a neat little guidebook explaining the whole story from beginning to end. He buried it. He scattered it across more than a dozen games, hidden inside minigames, tucked into background details, coded into secret rooms, and locked behind obscure Easter eggs that most players would never find on their own. The lore of this franchise wasn't designed to be understood easily. It was designed to be excavated, debated, argued over, and reassembled piece by piece by a community that refused to stop digging. And after more than a decade of digging, after countless fan theories and game theory episodes and late-night forum arguments, we finally have something close to a complete picture of what actually happened in the world of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. But that picture is darker than most people realize, and the connections between events run deeper than almost anyone expected. This isn't just a story about haunted animatronics at a pizza restaurant. This is a story about 2 men, William Afton and Henry Emily, whose partnership created something that was supposed to bring joy to children, and instead became a monument to suffering. This is a story about a family that was systematically destroyed by its own patriarch. This is a story about children who were murdered and then trapped in mechanical bodies for decades, unable to rest, unable to move on, are forced to relive their trauma night after night in the very place where they died. This is a story about how evil doesn't just disappear when you think you've defeated it, about how it adapts and evolves and finds new ways to survive, jumping from physical bodies to digital code to the minds of vulnerable people who never asked to be part of any of this. And the truly unsettling part, the timeline keeps getting longer. With the release of Secret of the Mimic in 2025, we now have events stretching all the way back to 1979, almost 50 years before the most recent games take place. The story of Fazbear Entertainment didn't begin where we thought it began. It started earlier, in a stranger place, with a different kind of horror, one that would eventually connect to everything that came after in ways that nobody saw coming. The Mimic, our prototype endoskeleton, created by an inventor named Edwin Murray, represents the earliest known threat in the entire FNAF canon, and its existence changes how we understand everything that follows. So buckle in, because we're going to walk through every major event in this timeline in chronological order. We're going to talk about the murders, the possessions, the experiments, the cover-ups, and the desperate final gambit by one man to end it all. We're going to examine how a single business partnership between 2 men spiraled into a generational nightmare that consumed everyone it touched. And we're going to look at the parts of this story that most people skip over, the uncomfortable details that make this timeline genuinely disturbing when you lay them all out in sequence and see the full scope of what happened. This is the FNAF timeline you were never supposed to see. Not because it was hidden, but because seeing it all at once, understanding the full weight of every decision and every consequence, changes the way you think about those silly animatronic animals on that tiny stage. They were never just robots. They were prisons, and the people trapped inside them have been screaming for help since 1983. Let's start at the very beginning, and I mean the real beginning. The one that most FNAF fans don't even know about yet. Before we go any further, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives into gaming lore. Now let's get into it. The prototype, Edwin Murray, the costume manor, and the birth of the mimic, 1979. Most people think the FNAF timeline starts with Fredbear's family diner, sometime in the early 1980s. And for years, that was true. That was the earliest point in the story that we had any real information about. But the release of Five Nights at Freddy's, Secret of the Mimic, in June 2025 pushed the timeline back even further, all the way to 1979, and introduced us to a character and a location that recontextualize everything we thought we knew about how this nightmare began. The year is 1979, and you're stepping into Murray's costume manor, an abandoned factory that was once the workshop of a contracted engineer named Edwin Murray. Edwin ran his own company, Murray's Costume Manor, but he wasn't working alone. He was a contractor for Fazbear Entertainment and commissioned to build animatronic characters and costume technology for the corporation. But Edwin had ambitions that went far beyond what his corporate employers had in mind. He had a singular obsession with building an animatronic character that could do something no other animatronics had ever done before. He wanted to build a machine that could become anything. A single endoskeleton that could slip into any costume, adopt any character, and mimic any behavior it observed. A universal performer that could be a friendly dog 1 minute, a dancing elephant the next, and something far more sinister the moment the lights went out. That machine was the Mimic, and it is arguably the most dangerous creation in the entire FNAF universe. The Mimic was first introduced to FNAF lore through the Tales from the Pizzaplex book series, specifically in a story that described an endoskeleton with the ability to adapt and learn from its surroundings. It could watch how people moved, how they spoke, how they behaved, and then replicate those behaviors with unsettling accuracy. It wasn't just a robot wearing a costume. It was a robot that could become the costume, that could absorb the identity of whatever character it was dressed as and perform that role convincingly enough to fool anyone watching. The concept alone is deeply creepy when you think about it. A machine that learns by watching, that adapts to whatever environment it's placed in, and that has no fixed identity of its own. It's a blank slate with the capacity to become anything, including something terrifying. In Secret of the Mimic, you play as Arnold, a technician sent by Fazbear Entertainment to retrieve the prototype technology from Murray's Costume Manor. The company wants the Mimic. They know about Edwin's work, and they want to acquire his designs for their own purposes. But what Arnold finds when he arrives at the Costume Manor is not a simple retrieval mission. The factory is a labyrinth of dark corridors and abandoned workshops, filled with the remnants of Edwin's unfinished projects. And somewhere in that darkness, the Mimic is still active, still watching, still learning, and still very, very dangerous. The animatronics that Arnold encounters throughout the Costume Manor are unlike anything we've seen in previous FNAF games. There's a dog animatronic, an elephant, a gnome, a human girl figure, a white tiger, and a Jack-in-the-Box character called Jackie. Each of these represents a different costume that the mimic can wear, a different identity it can adopt. And the terrifying implication is that the mimic isn't just wearing these costumes. It's becoming these characters, learning their movements and behaviors, and using them to hunt anyone who enters its territory. What makes the mimic so significant to the broader FNAF timeline is what it represents about the technology that would later be used by Fazbear Entertainment. The spring-lock suits that William Afton and Henry Emily would develop for Fredbear's family diner. The ones that allowed human performers to climb inside animatronic bodies share a conceptual DNA with the mimic's adaptive endoskeleton. Both are technologies designed to blur the line between human and machine, between performer and character. The mimic just takes that concept to its most extreme and most dangerous conclusion. There's also the question of what happened to Edwin Murray himself. The costume manor is abandoned when Arnold arrives, and the state of the factory suggests that something went very wrong in Edwin's workshop long before Fazbear Entertainment sent someone to investigate. Edwin had gone radio silent, ceasing all communication with his corporate employers and effectively surrendering his work to them by default. The game drops hints about a carnival fire, suggesting that the mimic may have been responsible for destroying an earlier entertainment venue before the events of the game. If that's true, it means the mimic was already dangerous and already causing harm years before anyone at Fazbear Entertainment got their hands on it. The fire that consumed the carnival could be one of the earliest instances of the franchise's signature event, a burning building, playing out long before the final fire in Pizzeria Simulator. The game's setting in 1979 makes it the earliest canonical story in the entire FNAF franchise. Everything that comes after, the diners, the pizzerias, the murders, the possessions, all of it happens in a world where the mimic already exists, and the mimic's legacy stretches far beyond 1979. There's strong evidence in the later games and books that the mimic, or something derived from its technology, is connected to Glitchtrap and Burntrap, the digital and physical manifestations of evil that plague the franchise's later entries. Some fans and theorists have suggested that Glitchtrap might not actually be William Afton's consciousness at all, but rather the mimic doing what it does best, mimicking Afton's personality and behavior after observing him for years within Fazbear Entertainment systems. If that theory holds up, it changes everything about how we understand the later games. It means that the evil haunting the Mega Pizzaplex in Security Breach might not be William Afton at all, but an ancient machine that learned to be evil by watching the most evil man in the franchise. The mimic doesn't have its own morality or its own desires. It simply becomes whatever it observes. And if it spent decades observing William Afton, then it would become the perfect copy of a serial killer, complete with his obsessions, his cruelty, and his refusal to stay dead. A secret of the mimic also introduces gameplay mechanics that feel like a deliberate callback to the franchise's roots, while pushing the formula forward. The game features free roam survival horror, meaning you're not sitting in a security office watching cameras anymore. You're physically exploring the costume manor, solving puzzles, using gadgets, and trying to avoid the mimic and its various costumed forms as they hunt you through the darkened corridors. The game has multiple endings, including a particularly disturbing bad ending, where the player character gets trapped inside a Freddy Fazbear suit, a fate that mirrors what would happen to William Afton's victims decades later, The connection between Edwin Murray's work and the later Fazbear animatronics raises uncomfortable questions about the entire corporate structure of Fazbear Entertainment. Edwin was already working for the company when he built the Mimic, which means Fazbear Entertainment had access to this dangerous adaptive technology from the very beginning. Henry Emily's spring-lock technology may have been inspired by or derived from the Mimic's adaptive endoskeleton, and if so, it means the seeds of every horror that followed were planted in this very workshop. The company took a dangerous technology created by one of its own contractors and refined it, making it available to a man, William Afton, who would use it for unspeakable purposes. And the fact that Fazbear Entertainment sent Arnold to recover their property from Edwin's abandoned workshop tells you everything about how they viewed these creations, as assets to be collected and repurposed, regardless of the danger they posed. The 1979 starting point also tells us something important about the institutional history of Fazbear Entertainment. This is a company that, from its very earliest days, was interested in acquiring technology that blurred the boundaries between machines and living things. They sent a technician to retrieve the Mimic, not because they wanted a simple performing robot, but because they wanted a machine that could become anything. That ambition, that desire to push animatronic technology beyond its natural limits, is the thread that connects every horror in the franchise. From the Springlock suits to the Funtime animatronics to the digital Glitchtrap virus, Fazbear Entertainment has always been a company that reached too far and paid the price in blood. Understanding the Mimic's origins in 1979 gives us a new lens through which to view the entire FNAF timeline. Every subsequent event, every murder, every haunting, every desperate attempt to end the cycle of suffering, all of it traces back to the fundamental question that Edwin Murray asked when he built his prototype. What happens when you create a machine that can become anything? The answer, as the next 50 years of FNAF history demonstrate, is nothing good. Fredbear's Family Diner, the partnership that started everything. Early 1980s. Sometime in the late 1970s or very early 1980s, two men came together to build something special, and their names were William Afton and Henry Emily, and on the surface, they seemed like the perfect business partners. Henry was the engineer, the creative genius, the man who could take steel and wires and circuits and turn them into characters that children would love. William was the business mind, the one who handled finances, customer relations, and the operational side of running an entertainment venue. Together, they founded Fredbear's Family Diner, a small restaurant centered around two performing animatronic characters, Fredbear, a golden bear, and Spring Bonnie, a golden rabbit. These two characters would become the foundation of an entertainment empire. But more importantly, the technology behind them would become the foundation of a nightmare. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were built using Henry's Springlock technology, a revolutionary design that allowed the animatronic suits to serve a dual purpose. In their default state, the suits functioned as autonomous animatronics, performing pre-programmed routines on stage for the entertainment of children and families. But with the turn of a hand crank and the compression of a series of spring-loaded locks, the endoskeleton inside the suit could be pushed back against the walls of the costume, creating enough space for a human performer to climb inside and wear the suit like a mascot costume. This meant that Fredbear and Spring Bonnie could be either robots or costumes depending on what the situation required. On paper, this was an elegant solution to a common problem in the entertainment industry. Autonomous animatronics were impressive, but limited in their interactions with guests, Our human performers in mascot costumes were more flexible but lacked the spectacle of a moving, singing robot. Spring lock technology gave you both in one package. The same suit that performed on stage during the show could be worn by a human employee during meet and greets, birthday parties, and other interactive events. It was clever. It was innovative. It was also extraordinarily dangerous. The spring lock mechanism worked by keeping the endoskeleton compressed under tremendous tension. The locks that held the springs in place were small, delicate, and sensitive to moisture. If the locks failed, if they got wet from the performer's breath or sweat, if they were jostled too hard, if anything went wrong at all, the springs would snap back to their default position with crushing force, dragging the endoskeleton with them. And if there was a human being inside the suit when that happened, the metal framework would slam into their body from all sides simultaneously, piercing flesh, crushing organs, and causing a death so agonizing that the training tapes from later games describe victims being conscious for hours as they slowly bled out inside the suit while being told not to scream so they wouldn't disturb the guests. But in the early days of Fredbear's family diner, those dangers were either unknown or considered an acceptable risk. The diner was a success. Children loved Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Families came for the pizza and the shows and the birthday parties. William and Henry were making money and making people happy, and for a brief shining moment, everything was going according to plan. What nobody knew, what nobody could have known at the time, was that William Afton was already changing. Something was wrong with him. Something that may have always been wrong with him, but was now finding an outlet in the environment he had helped create. The man who smiled at children during the day was developing appetites that would eventually consume everything around him. Whether William was always a monster hiding behind a friendly mask, or whether something in his personality shifted during this period, is one of the great unanswered questions of FNAF lore. What we do know is that the William Afton of the early 1980s was not the same man who would later be described as wicked, cold-blooded, and methodical. He was still building toward that, still finding his darkness, still figuring out what he was capable of. And Henry, brilliant, talented, well-meaning Henry, had no idea what was growing inside his business partner. He was too busy building things, too busy engineering new animatronics, refining his springlock designs, and trying to expand the business. When their success at Fredbear's family diner led to the creation of a larger franchise, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, Henry threw himself into the creative work with even more intensity. He designed new characters, Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox, each with their own personality, their own look, their own appeal to different segments of the child audience. The franchise was growing, and Henry was the engine driving that growth. But the expansion of the business also meant that both men were spending more time at work and less time with their families. And this is a detail that's easy to overlook in the broader horror narrative, but it matters enormously for understanding what happens next. William Afton had 3 children, his eldest son Michael, his daughter Elizabeth, and his youngest son, often referred to by the community as the crying child. Henry had a daughter named Charlotte. These children were growing up in the shadow of their father's business, spending time in and around the restaurants, surrounded by animatronics that were supposed to be friendly and fun, but that harbored secrets and dangers that the adults either didn't see or chose to ignore. Henry, to his credit, recognized that his absence was a problem. He worried about Charlotte's safety, particularly at the restaurant, where she might be left unsupervised while he worked on animatronics in the back, or his solution was characteristically Henry. He built something. He created the marionette, also known as the puppet, a security animatronic designed specifically to watch over Charlotte. The puppet was coded to track Charlotte's location and ensure her safety whenever she was at the pizzeria. It was a loving gesture from a father who couldn't always be there in person, but wanted to make sure his daughter was protected even when he wasn't watching. The tragic irony is that the puppet's design would prove to be one of the most important elements in the entire FNAF story, but not for the reason Henry intended. He built the puppet to protect Charlotte. Instead, it would become her tomb. The early 1980s represent the last moment of innocence in the FNAF timeline. Fredbear's family diner was still a happy place. The animatronics were still just machines. The children who visited were still safe. William Afton was still a businessman, not yet a killer. Henry Emily was still an optimist, not yet a man haunted by guilt and grief. Everything that would go wrong, every death, every haunting, every act of violence and deception, every desperate attempt to put things right, all of it was still waiting in the future, gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. But the storm was coming, and when it arrived, it would destroy everything these two men had built, along with everyone they loved. The partnership between William Afton and Henry Emily is the central tragedy of the FNAF timeline. Two men who could have created something genuinely wonderful instead created the perfect environment for horror. Henry provided the technology that made possession possible, the spring-lock suits and animatronic bodies that could serve as vessels for trapped souls. William provided the evil that gave those vessels their ghosts. Neither man's contribution to the nightmare makes sense without the other. Without Henry's genius, William would have been just another killer. Without William's cruelty, Henry's creations would have been just machines. Together, they built a house of horrors that would take decades to burn down, and the fire that finally consumed it would be lit by Henry's own hand as an act of desperate, grief-stricken atonement. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before the fire, before the final reckoning, there was a year that changed everything. A year when the first children died, when the first animatronics became haunted, and when the Afton family began its long, terrible unraveling. That year was 1983. 1983, the year everything shattered. If there's a single year that defines the FNAF timeline, a point where the story pivots from tragedy to horror and never looks back, it's 1983. This is the year when the bodies started piling up. This is the year when the animatronics stopped being machines and became something else entirely. This is the year when William Afton stepped fully into the darkness and committed the first act of violence that would set the entire franchise in motion. And this is the year when the Afton family suffered a wound so deep and so permanent that it would echo forward through decades of suffering, turning father against son, brother against brother, and transforming a dysfunctional family into a cursed bloodline. Let's start with the murder that started everything. Charlotte Emily, Henry's daughter, the girl the puppet was built to protect, was killed outside Fredbear's family diner by William Afton. The exact circumstances are shown in the Take Cake to the Children minigame from Five Nights at Freddy's 2, where we see a purple figure, William Afton, approach a crying child outside the restaurant and kill her. Charlotte was locked outside the pizzeria at the time, separated from the puppet that was supposed to keep her safe. Whether she was locked out deliberately as part of a cruel prank orchestrated by other children, or whether William Afton himself engineered her isolation is still debated, but the result was the same. Charlotte was alone, vulnerable, and William took her life. The significance of Charlotte's murder cannot be overstated. She was the first known victim of William Afton's killing spree, and her death set in motion two of the most important elements of the entire FNAF mythology. First, her spirit possessed the puppet, the very animatronic her father had built to protect her. The security robot designed to watch over Charlotte in life became her vessel in death, a haunted machine animated by the spirit of a murdered child. Second, the possessed puppet would later give the spirits of other murdered children the ability to inhabit the main animatronic characters, essentially becoming the one who puts the souls of the dead into the bodies of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Charlotte, even in death, was trying to protect other children, to give them a form of existence beyond their murders, even if that existence was a kind of prison. For Henry, and the murder of his daughter was a devastation beyond words. The FNAF lore tells us that Charlotte's death pushed Henry to the brink of suicide, that the guilt of knowing he couldn't protect his own child, despite building a machine specifically designed to do so, nearly destroyed him. He had created the puppet. He had programmed it to watch over Charlotte, and it had failed or been prevented from doing its job, and Charlotte had paid the ultimate price. That guilt would consume Henry for decades, driving his every decision from that point forward, until it ultimately led him to devise the desperate plan that would form the climax of the entire FNAF story arc. But Charlotte's murder wasn't the only tragedy of 1983. The Afton family was about to suffer its own catastrophic loss, a one that would be caused not by William's evil, but by the cruelty of his own children toward each other. The events leading up to what the FNAF community calls the Bite of 83 are shown through the end-of-night minigames in Five Nights at Freddy's 4. We follow the crying child, William Afton's youngest son, through the days leading up to his birthday party at Fredbear's family diner. And what we see is a child who is absolutely terrified. He's afraid of the animatronics. He cries constantly. He doesn't want to be at the diner, doesn't want to be anywhere near Fredbear or Spring Bonnie or any of the other characters that his father helped create. And his older brother Michael, along with Michael's friends, thinks this fear is hilarious. The bullying that the crying child endures in these minigames is relentless and cruel. Michael and his friends wear masks of the animatronic characters to scare their younger brother. They jump out at him, chase him, and mock him for being afraid. They know exactly what terrifies him, and they exploit that fear for their own entertainment. It's the kind of casual childhood cruelty that exists in the real world, the kind where older kids torment younger ones because they can, because they think it's funny, because they don't understand or don't care about the damage they're doing. On the day of the crying child's birthday party, the bullying reaches its peak. Michael and his friends grab the crying child and carry him toward the Fredbear animatronic on stage. The child is screaming, crying, begging them to stop, clearly experiencing genuine panic and terror. But the older boys think it's a game. They think they're giving him a closer look at the thing he's afraid of, that forcing him to confront his fear will somehow be funny or helpful. They shove the crying child's head directly into Fredbear's mouth, laughing and calling it a big kiss, and then Fredbear's jaw closes. The animatronic spring mechanisms continued their programmed movement, and the jaw clamped down on the crying child's skull with mechanical force that no child's body could withstand. The bullies stopped laughing immediately. The birthday party was over. The child was rushed to the hospital with catastrophic head injuries, and despite medical intervention, the crying child died from his wounds. The aftermath of the bite of 83 is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the entire franchise. As the crying child lies dying in the hospital, we hear a voice, possibly coming from the Fredbear plush toy that has been the child's companion throughout the minigames, saying the words, "I will put you back together." This phrase has been analysed and debated endlessly by the FNAF community, with theories ranging from it being William Afton's voice promising to somehow revive his son, to it being a supernatural entity offering the child a form of existence beyond death. The most widely accepted interpretation is that the crying child's spirit went on to possess Golden Freddy, one of the most mysterious and powerful entities in the entire FNAF universe. Golden Freddy appears throughout the franchise as a ghostly, glitching figure that can crash games, appear in impossible locations, and generally operates outside the normal rules that govern the other animatronics. And if the crying child is indeed Golden Freddy, then his death at Fredbear's family diner didn't end his story. It transformed him into something powerful, something angry, and something that would haunt the franchise for decades to come. For Michael Afton, the brother who caused the bite, the guilt was immediate and permanent. The Five Nights at Freddy's 4 gameplay, which features nightmarish versions of the animatronics attacking the player in a child's bedroom, is widely believed to represent Michael's guilt-fueled nightmares in the aftermath of his brother's death. The nightmare animatronics, with their rows of razor-sharp teeth and glowing eyes and grotesque proportions, aren't real creatures. They're the manifestations of a boy's guilt, and his subconscious punishing him night after night with visions of the characters associated with the worst moment of his life. Every time Nightmare Fredbear appears in the game, it's Michael's mind reminding him of what he did, of the sound of that jaw closing, of the look on his brother's face in that final moment. Some theorists have suggested that William Afton may have been conducting fear experiments on the crying child before the bite, using cameras hidden in the bedroom, visible in Sister Location's private room, where the code 1983 reveals camera feeds from the FNAF4 gameplay location, to monitor his youngest son's reactions to frightening stimuli. If true, this means William was already experimenting on his own children before the bite of 83, and using his son as a test subject in some dark research project related to fear and its effects on the human mind. The fact that William apparently never intervened to stop Michael's bullying of his younger brother, despite having the means to monitor what was happening, suggests either profound negligence or deliberate indifference to his children's suffering. The bite of 83 had immediate consequences for Fredbear's family diner. The incident, in which an animatronic crushed a child's skull during a birthday party, was exactly the kind of catastrophe that no entertainment venue could survive. Fredbear's family diner was closed, its doors shuttered, its animatronics deactivated and stored away. The golden era of the original diner was over, destroyed by a moment of childhood cruelty and mechanical indifference. But the franchise itself didn't die. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the larger and more elaborate successor to Fredbear's Family Diner, was still operating. The newer characters, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, were still performing on stage, still entertaining children, still generating revenue for a company that was already learning how to survive scandal and tragedy. The closure of Fredbear's was a setback, not a death sentence. The show would go on, and William Afton, the man at the center of this expanding nightmare, was about to take his darkness to an entirely new level. Something changed in William after the events of 1983. whether it was Charlotte's murder, his son's death, or some combination of both. The man who had been slowly developing his capacity for evil now accelerated into full-blown serial killing. The murder of Charlotte Emily had taught him something. It had shown him that when a child died near one of his animatronics, something happened. The child's spirit didn't just disappear, it lingered. It attached itself to the nearest vessel, whether that was the puppet or the golden Freddy suit, and it continued to exist in some form beyond death. For anyone with a conscience, this would have been a source of horror and guilt. For William Afton, it was a source of fascination, because if the spirits of the dead could be captured and contained within animatronic bodies, then perhaps those spirits could also be harvested. Perhaps their energy, what later games would call remnant, could be extracted and used. Perhaps the secret to immortality wasn't in medicine or technology, but in the souls of murdered children. And this is the moment when William Afton stopped being a killer and became something worse. He became a scientist of death, a researcher whose laboratory was a children's pizza restaurant, and whose test subjects were the most vulnerable people in the world. He didn't kill because he was angry, or because he had something to gain from any individual murder. He killed because he wanted to understand the mechanics of possession, the properties of remnant, and the possibility of living forever. Every child he murdered from this point forward was an experiment, a data point in a research project that would span decades and consume dozens of lives. The year 1983 is where the FNAF timeline stops being sad and starts being genuinely horrifying. Before this year, you could look at the story and see tragedy, mistakes, bad luck, and the consequences of human failure. After this year, you're looking at deliberate, calculated evil operating within a system that was designed to be trusted by children and families. William Afton didn't just kill children. He killed them inside the very places that were supposed to be the safest environments in the world. He used the trust that families placed in his restaurants as a weapon against them, luring victims into back rooms with a smile on his face and a Spring Bonnie costume hiding his intentions. And the worst part? He was just getting started. The Missing Children and the Haunted Machines, 1985 to 1987. The period between 1985 and 1987 represents the darkest chapter in Fazbear Entertainment's already blood-soaked history. This is when the Missing Children incident occurred, or when 5 young lives were snuffed out in a single act of calculated violence, and when the animatronic characters at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza stopped being machines and became prisons for the souls of murdered kids. This is also the period that gave us the Bite of 87, a second animatronic attack that would permanently alter how the franchise operated and cement Freddy Fazbear's reputation as a place where terrible things happened to the people who visited. Let's talk about the Missing Children incident first, because it's the event that defines the entire franchise. In 1985, William Afton donned the Spring Bonnie suit and lured 5 children into the back room of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Their names, as revealed through various games and supplementary materials, were Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. 5 kids who walked into a pizza restaurant expecting fun and birthday cake and games, and instead walked into the arms of a monster wearing the face of a friendly rabbit. William killed them all. And then he did something that elevated his crimes from murder to something almost supernatural in its cruelty. He stuffed their bodies into the animatronic suits. Gabriel went into Freddy. Jeremy went into Bonnie. Susie went into Chica. Fritz went into Foxy. And Cassidy, perhaps the most significant of the 5, went into Golden Freddy, The children's spirits, unable to move on, unable to rest, became trapped inside the very machines that were supposed to entertain kids just like them. They were stuck in a nightmarish existence, conscious but imprisoned, aware but unable to communicate, feeling their own decaying bodies trapped inside metal and plastic shells that smiled and sang and performed for audiences that had no idea what was hidden inside. Picture that for a moment. Imagine being a child. Imagine being murdered. And then imagine waking up inside a mechanical body that you can't control, surrounded by darkness, hearing the muffled sounds of other children laughing and playing in the very restaurant where you died. Imagine feeling the remnants of your physical body decaying around you inside the suit, knowing that the thing wearing your corpse is still out there performing for families who bring their own children to this place, trusting that it's safe. That's the reality of what happened to these 5 kids. That's what William Afton created when he stuffed their bodies into those suits. The puppet, and still possessed by Charlotte Emily's spirit, played a crucial role in what happened next. Charlotte, even in death, was still trying to protect children, still fulfilling the purpose her father had designed her for, even though that purpose had been perverted beyond recognition. The puppet is believed to have given the 5 murdered children the ability to fully possess their animatronic hosts, to become the characters rather than simply being trapped inside them. Whether this was an act of mercy, giving the children some form of existence and agency beyond their murders, or an act of desperation, binding them to the physical world so they could eventually seek justice, is one of the great philosophical questions of the FNAF story. What we do know is that from 1985 onward, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy were no longer just animatronics. They were haunted, they were angry, and at night, when the restaurant was empty and the cameras were the only things watching, they moved, they wandered the halls. They searched for something, or someone. The children trapped inside them couldn't distinguish between the man who had killed them and the adults who worked the night shift at the restaurant. All they knew was that an adult in the building had hurt them, and anyone who resembled that threat became a target. This is the genesis of the core 5 Nights at Freddy's gameplay loop. Every time you sit in that security office and watch Freddy creep down the hallway on your camera feed. Every time you hear Bonnie's footsteps approaching from the left corridor. Every time Foxy sprints toward your door, you're experiencing the consequences of what William Afton did in 1985. Those animatronics aren't malfunctioning. They're hunting. The children inside them are still looking for the man who killed them, and they will attack anyone who gets between them and their search for justice. The missing children incident also marked the beginning of the end for Fazbear Entertainment's reputation. 5 children disappeared from a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, and despite the company's best efforts to contain the story, rumors spread. Parents became nervous. News reports mentioned the missing kids in connection with the restaurant. The company tried to push forward, tried to pretend that everything was fine, but the stain of those 5 missing children never fully washed away. It lingered in the background of every subsequent location, every reopening, every attempt to rebrand and start fresh. Now let's move forward to 1987, when Fazbear Entertainment made its most ambitious and most disastrous attempt to rehabilitate its image. The company opened a new, larger Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, this time featuring a line of brand new animatronics called the Toy Characters. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and the Mangle were designed to be sleeker, more modern, and more appealing than the older animatronics. They had facial recognition technology that was supposedly connected to a criminal database, allowing them to identify potential threats. And they looked friendlier, less intimidating, more like the kind of characters you'd want entertaining your children at a birthday party. But the old animatronics were still there too. The original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, the ones harboring the spirits of 5 murdered children, were kept in a back room designated for parts and service. They were supposedly decommissioned, stored away until they could be repurposed or repaired. But decommissioned doesn't mean inactive when the machines in question are possessed by angry ghosts. The old animatronics still moved at night, still wandered the hallways, still searched for the man who had killed the children inside them. 5 Nights at Freddy's 2 takes place during this period, and the player assumes the role of a night guard named Jeremy Fitzgerald, who has to survive 5 nights at the new location while dealing with threats from both the toy animatronics and the original possessed characters. The phone guy, the friendly voice that guides the player through the game via recorded messages, drops several critical pieces of lore during these calls. He mentions that someone used a yellow suit, a spare in the back, to lure children into a back room. He talks about the restaurant being on edge, about investigations, about the company trying to keep things quiet. And then there's the Bite of 87. This event, referenced in the very first 5 Nights at Freddy's game by Phone Guy, was one of the franchise's earliest and most tantalizing mysteries. Phone Guy casually mentions that a previous security guard had the frontal lobe of his brain bitten off by an animatronic, an incident that led to the rule that animatronics were no longer allowed to walk around during the day. For years, fans debated which animatronic committed the bite and who the victim was. The most widely supported theory, based on evidence accumulated across multiple games, points to one of the toy animatronics as the culprit. Scott Cawthon once asked fans why the miniature toy Chica figure in the FNAF 4 minigames was missing her beak, a hint that many interpreted as pointing toward toy Chica as the biter. The victim is believed to have been a security guard, possibly Jeremy Fitzgerald himself, the player character of FNAF 2. According to information from the week before, the victim survived the attack, but was left unable to speak afterward. Evidence suggests the Bite of 87 occurred on November 14th, 1987, during a birthday party scheduled at the restaurant. On Night 6 of FNAF 2, which takes place on November 13th, there's mention of a birthday party planned for the following day. This birthday party is widely believed to be the setting for the bite. The incident resulted in the immediate closure of the 1987 location and the retirement of all toy animatronics, which were scrapped and never used again. The Bite of 87 is distinct from the Bite of 83, which we discussed earlier. This was a long-running source of confusion in the FNAF community, exacerbated by the famous moment when YouTuber Markiplier, upon seeing the Bite of 83 in FNAF 4, exclaimed, "Was that the Bite of 87?" A reaction that became one of the franchise's most enduring memes. The two events share superficial similarities, both involving animatronic jaws and severe head injuries, but they occurred 4 years apart at different locations and had different victims and different perpetrators. The closure of the 1987 location was devastating for Fazbear Entertainment, but it still wasn't the end, and the company's response to disaster was always the same. Close the current location, wait for the heat to die down, and then open a new one somewhere else. It was a strategy of perpetual reinvention, each new location trying to distance itself from the horrors of the last. while inevitably creating new horrors of its own. The old animatronics, the possessed ones, were always kept in storage, always brought back out for the next reopening, always carrying their dead passengers along for the ride. The period from 1985 to 1987 established the template that the rest of the FNAF timeline would follow. Murder, possession, investigation, cover-up, closure, reopening. Over and over again, it's the same cycle playing out at different locations with different characters, but always with the same fundamental problem at its core. There were dead children inside the machines, and nobody was willing to do what it took to set them free. Meanwhile, William Afton was still out there, still killing, still experimenting, still searching for the secret of immortality in the suffering of children. And his next project would be his most ambitious and most horrifying yet. A secret underground facility where the animatronics weren't just possessed by ghosts. They were designed to kill from the very beginning. The underground horror, Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. If the missing children incident showed us what William Afton was willing to do to other people's children, then Sister Location showed us what he was willing to do to his own. And Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, the secret underground facility that serves as the setting for Five Nights at Freddy's, Sister Location, represents the moment when William's obsession with remnant and immortality overtook whatever scraps of humanity he had left. This is where he stopped pretending to be a normal businessman and fully embraced his identity as a monster. And the first victim of his new enterprise wasn't a stranger. It was his own daughter, Elizabeth Afton. The facility itself is a marvel of twisted engineering. Located underground, accessible only through an elevator that descends deep beneath the surface, Circus Baby's entertainment and rental was ostensibly a service that rented out advanced animatronic characters for private parties and events. Yet the animatronics here were different from the Freddy Fazbear characters. They were sleeker, more sophisticated, more humanoid in their design and movement. Circus Baby, the star of the collection, was a tall, elegant figure with red hair, green eyes, and an ice cream dispenser built into her torso. Ballora was a graceful ballerina who danced with her eyes closed. Funtime Freddy was a white and pink version of the classic Freddy character, complete with a hand puppet named Bon Bon. And Funtime Foxy was a sleek white fox with a more refined design than the original Foxy. These animatronics weren't just entertainers, they were traps. William Afton had designed every single one of them with hidden mechanisms specifically intended to capture and kill children. The blueprints for the Funtime animatronics, visible in the game, are revealed design features that have no purpose other than abduction and murder. Funtime Freddy has a storage compartment in his chest cavity large enough to hold a child. Ballora has a similar compartment, and Circus Baby, the crown jewel of William's collection, has the most elaborate killing mechanism of them all. Baby was programmed with a child-counting sensor that monitored the number of children in any room she occupied. When the count dropped to 1, when there was a single child alone with Baby, the animatronic would dispense ice cream from her built-in dispenser, luring the child closer. And when the child was close enough, a mechanical claw concealed inside Baby's torso would extend, grab the child, and pull them inside the animatronic's body. The child would be killed instantly, their body hidden inside the machine, and no one watching from the outside would have any idea what had just happened. The animatronic that was entertaining children moments ago had just consumed one of them, and it did so silently, efficiently, and without any external sign that anything was wrong. This is the machine that killed Elizabeth Afton. William had built Baby to capture children, but he had explicitly told Elizabeth to stay away from the animatronic. He knew what it could do. He knew the danger. But Elizabeth was fascinated by Baby, drawn to the beautiful animatronic that her father had created. She saw Baby performing for a group of children, dispensing ice cream and singing, and she wanted to be close to it. She wanted her own ice cream. She wanted to interact with this amazing machine that her daddy had built. So, when the other children left and Elizabeth was alone with Baby, the child counting sensor activated, the ice cream dispensed, the claw emerged, and Elizabeth was gone. The minigame that shows this event is one of the most disturbing sequences in the entire franchise. We see Baby through Elizabeth's eyes. Watch as she approaches the animatronic despite her father's warnings. Watch as the ice cream appears, and then see the claw snap out and grab her. The screen goes dark. Elizabeth is dead, and the animatronic that killed her, the machine that was specifically designed to murder children, is now possessed by the spirit of the child it consumed. When we encounter Baby later in the game, her eyes have changed from blue to green, matching Elizabeth's eye color. This is the telltale sign that the possession has occurred, and Elizabeth Afton is now trapped inside the machine that killed her, just like the 5 children who were stuffed into the Freddy Fazbear animatronics. There's a deeply sick irony in this. William Afton designed Baby to capture and kill other people's children so he could harvest their remnant for his immortality experiments. Instead, his own daughter became the first and most significant victim of his creation. The man who had shown no mercy to Charlotte Emily or the 5 missing children had his cruelty reflected back at him through the death of his own flesh and blood. And his response to this tragedy tells you everything you need to know about what kind of person he truly was. Instead of shutting down the facility, instead of destroying Baby and the other fun-time animatronics, instead of grieving for his daughter and reconsidering the path he was on, William Afton sent his oldest son Michael into the facility on what can only be described as a suicide mission. He told Michael to go underground, to find Elizabeth, to somehow free her from Baby. But the facility was designed as a death trap, and William knew that. He sent Michael knowing full well that his son would likely die there. Whether this was a genuine, misguided attempt to save Elizabeth or a deliberate sacrifice of one child to study what had happened to the other is still debated by the community. Michael went into the facility, and what happened to him there is one of the most body horror intensive sequences in the entire franchise. Over the course of 5 nights working as a technician at the underground facility, Michael gradually uncovers the true nature of the Funtime animatronics and the horrifying purpose behind the scooping room. The scooper, whose full designation is SCUP, which stands for Scalable Creation of Ulterior Presence, is a massive mechanical device designed to remove the endoskeletons from the animatronic bodies. But that's not its only function. The scooper's blueprints reveal that it also contains a remnant reservoir, a chamber filled with the spiritual essence harvested from previous victims. The remnant is kept in stasis at a controlled high temperature between uses, and the blueprints note that overheating the remnant will permanently neutralize its effects. This detail becomes critically important later in the timeline, when fire is used as the ultimate weapon against possessed animatronics. By night 5, the Funtime animatronics have merged their endoskeletons into a single entity called Enard. This nightmarish amalgamation of mechanical parts from Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, And Funtime Foxy is controlled primarily by Baby, who is in turn motivated by Elizabeth's spirit and her desperate desire to escape the underground facility. Baby guides Michael to the scooping room under the pretense of helping him, but the truth is far more sinister. Ennard needs a human body to use as a disguise to escape the facility, and Michael is the only human available. The scooper activates. In a scene that is genuinely horrifying despite its stylized presentation, Michael's internal organs are removed from his body. He dies. And then Ennard crawls inside his hollowed-out skin, wearing Michael Afton like a suit, and walks out of the facility into the world above. What follows is shown through a series of custom night cutscenes that are among the most disturbing in the series. We watch, in 8-bit style, as Michael's body slowly decays while Ennard wears it. His skin changes colour, going from normal to sickly to a deep rotting purple. People on the street react with increasing horror to his appearance. His body is literally falling apart around the mechanical entity inside it, and eventually, Ennard is forced to abandon the decomposing shell. Michael's body collapses in a heap on the ground. Ennard slithers into the sewers, and everything seems to be over. But then Michael gets back up. In one of the franchise's most shocking reveals, we learn that Michael Afton somehow survived being scooped. His body was hollowed out, used as a meat suit by a collective of possessed animatronics, left to rot in the street, and abandoned. But he didn't die. Or rather, he died and came back, reanimated by the remnant that had been injected into him by the scooper. Michael Afton became a walking corpse, a dead man who continued to exist through the same supernatural force that kept the murdered children trapped in their animatronic bodies. He was technically alive, but his body was decayed and ruined, explaining the rotting odor that would later be noted when he worked at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza under the alias Mike Schmidt. After Ennard abandoned Michael's body, the internal conflicts within the merged entity reached a breaking point. Baby, driven by Elizabeth's aggressive and controlling personality, clashed with the other animatronic spirits that made up Ennard, and the others eventually rebelled against Baby's leadership and ejected her from the collective, casting her out of Ennard's body. Baby, now operating independently, found scrap parts and rebuilt herself into a new form, one that would later be known as Scrap Baby. Meanwhile, the remaining components of Ennard, now without Baby, continued to exist as a separate entity called Molten Freddy, a tangled mass of wires and metal and trapped souls that would eventually find its way to the surface. Sister Location reveals the full extent of William Afton's depravity. He didn't just murder other people's children. He built machines specifically designed to murder children. He created an entire underground facility dedicated to harvesting the spiritual energy of his victims. He watched his own daughter die inside one of his creations and responded by sending his other child into the same death trap. And the technology he developed, the scooper and the remnant reservoir, proved that his understanding of the supernatural properties of murdered souls was far more advanced than anyone had realized. William Afton wasn't just a serial killer. He was an engineer of death, and Circus Baby's entertainment and rental was his masterwork. The Sister Location events also complete the destruction of the Afton family. William's youngest son died in the bite of 83. His daughter died inside Circus Baby. His eldest son was scooped, hollowed out, and reanimated as a walking corpse. And William himself, as we'll see in the next section, was about to suffer a fate that was arguably worse than death. The Afton family, once a presumably normal household, with 3 children and 2 parents, had been completely consumed by William's obsession. Every member of the family was either dead, undead, or trapped inside a machine. The sins of the father had literally devoured his children. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, 1993, Michael's Mission, and the birth of Springtrap. After the horrors of Sister Location, after being scooped and reanimated and left with a rotting body that no amount of cologne could disguise, Michael Afton had a choice. He could have walked away. He could have disappeared into the world, a dead man who refused to stay dead, and tried to build some semblance of a life for himself far from the restaurants and animatronics that had destroyed his family. But Michael didn't walk away. Instead, he walked right back into the heart of the nightmare. In 1993, the final Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location was still operating, and Michael Afton got a job there as the night security guard under the alias Mike Schmidt. This is the setting of the original Five Nights at Freddy's, the game that started the entire franchise, and playing it with the knowledge of Michael's backstory transforms the experience from a simple survival horror game into something much more tragic and personal. Michael wasn't at Freddy's because he needed a job. He was there because he had a mission. After everything his father had done, after watching his family be destroyed by William Afton's obsession, Michael had decided to try to make things right. He wanted to find and confront his father. He wanted to free the spirits trapped inside the animatronics. He wanted to undo, or at least atone for, the damage that the Afton name had caused. Michael's journey through the FNAF games isn't the story of a random security guard trying to survive. It's the story of a son trying to clean up his father's mess, a brother haunted by the guilt of causing his younger sibling's death, and a victim of abuse and manipulation who chose to fight back against the evil that had consumed his family. The gameplay of FNAF 1 takes on new meaning when you understand that the animatronics hunting Michael are possessed by children who were killed by his father. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy aren't just malfunctioning robots. They're the restless spirits of murdered kids who can sense that someone connected to their killer is in the building. They can't distinguish between William and Michael in the darkness. All they know is that an Afton is here, and Aftons are dangerous. The irony is devastating. Michael came to help them, but they can't understand that. They just want to kill anyone who reminds them of the man who ended their lives. Michael survived 7 nights at the original Freddy's location. During his shift, he tampered with the animatronics' AI values, presumably as part of his effort to understand or communicate with the spirits inside them. He was eventually fired for tampering with the animatronics and for the odor that his decomposing body produced, a darkly comic detail that takes on horrifying implications when you remember that Michael's body was literally rotting. After Michael's departure, and at some point following the closure of the 1993 location, William Afton returned to the restaurant with a specific purpose. He wanted to dismantle the original animatronics, the ones that contained the spirits of the 5 missing children. His goal was to free the remnant, the spiritual energy trapped inside the machines, and absorb it for himself. This event is depicted in the Follow Me minigames from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, where we see the purple figure, William, systematically destroying the animatronic characters one by one in the abandoned restaurant. But William underestimated the spirits he had created. As he dismantled the animatronics, the ghosts of the 5 murdered children were released from their mechanical prisons, and they were angry. They had been trapped inside those suits for nearly a decade, unable to rest, unable to move on. And now they found themselves face to face with the man who had killed them. The spirits surrounded William, and their ghostly forms closing in on him in the darkness of the abandoned restaurant. William panicked, and in his panic, he made the worst decision of his life. He ran to the one place he thought would protect him, the spring bonnie suit in the back room. The same suit he had worn to lure children to their deaths. The same suit with a notoriously dangerous spring lock mechanism that could snap shut at any moment. William climbed inside, thinking the suit would shield him from the vengeful spirits. And for a moment, it seemed to work. The ghost hesitated, apparently confused or frightened by the sight of the golden rabbit suit. But the safe room where William hid was damp. The spring lock mechanism, sensitive to moisture, began to fail, and the spring snapped. The death of William Afton inside the spring bonnie suit is one of the most iconic and most gruesome moments in gaming history. The spring locks released, and the metal endoskeleton inside the suit slammed back into its default position with William still inside. Metal bars and crossbeams pierced his body from every direction. The mechanical framework crushed his organs, his muscles, his bones. Blood filled the suit, seeping through the joints and seams of the golden rabbit costume. William screamed as the life was squeezed out of him, as metal rods drove through his flesh and pinned him in place inside the very costume he had used as a disguise for murder. But William Afton didn't die. Not completely, not permanently. The remnant he had been experimenting with, the spiritual energy he had been trying to harvest and weaponize, kept him tethered to the physical world. His body was destroyed, crushed and impaled inside the spring bonnie suit, but his consciousness persisted. His spirit fused with the suit, just as the children's spirits had fused with the animatronics he had stuffed them into. William Afton became Springtrap, a grotesque fusion of man and machine, a mummified corpse trapped inside a rotting golden rabbit costume, still conscious, still aware, still evil, but now imprisoned in the very instrument of his crimes. There is a brutal poetic justice in what happened to William Afton. He had spent years stuffing the bodies of murdered children into animatronic suits, forcing their spirits to become one with the machines that were supposed to entertain them. Now the same fate had befallen him. He was experiencing firsthand what he had inflicted on his victims, the claustrophobic horror of being trapped inside a mechanical body, unable to move, unable to escape, unable to die. The only difference was that his victims had been innocent children who never asked for their fate. William had walked into the spring bonnie suit voluntarily, driven by the same cowardice that had always defined him beneath the surface of his calculated cruelty. When faced with the consequences of his actions, when the ghosts of his victims finally came for him, he ran and hid, and hiding killed him. But even in death, even as Springtrap, William Afton remained dangerous. The phone guy's training tapes from FNAF 3 describe the springlock failure process in horrifying detail. Workers who experience a springlock failure are instructed not to scream and not to bleed on the floor where customers can see, and to quietly move to a back room where they can die out of public view. The tapes describe the victim being conscious for an extended period, as the metal framework slowly crushes them from the inside, feeling every crossbeam and support rod pierce their body. The company's primary concern isn't saving the victim. It's preventing customers from witnessing the death. This casual acceptance of employee death as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy tells you everything you need to know about Fazbear Entertainment's corporate values. The safe room where William died was sealed by Fazbear Entertainment, which was following its standard protocol of hiding evidence rather than dealing with problems. The room was walled off, hidden from view, and forgotten. William Afton, now Springtrap, he sat in that darkness for 30 years. 30 years of consciousness without movement, without sensation, without anything except the awareness that he was trapped. The man who had sought immortality had found it, and it was a kind of hell that even he probably hadn't imagined. During those 30 years, the restaurant closed and the world moved on. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza became a memory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of corporate negligence and the dark side of children's entertainment. The missing children were never officially found. The murders were never officially solved. Fazbear Entertainment faded into obscurity, remembered only by true crime enthusiasts and the families of victims who never got the closure they deserved. And somewhere in the walls of a sealed-off back room, and behind layers of drywall and forgotten building plans, Springtrap waited, patient, conscious, undying, waiting for someone to find him. Someone eventually did. The final plan, Fazbear's Fright and Henry's Trap. 30 years after the last Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the franchise's sordid history had become the stuff of urban legend. The missing children, the animatronic malfunctions, the mysterious closures, all of it had been absorbed into local folklore, transformed from real tragedies into spooky stories that people told around campfires or shared on internet forums. And where there are spooky stories, there's money to be made. At least, that's what someone at Fazbear Entertainment thought when they decided to open Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. The concept was simple, and in hindsight, breathtakingly stupid. Take the darkest, most disturbing aspects of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza legacy and turn them into a haunted house attraction. Use authentic props and decorations from the original restaurants. Lean into the creepy reputation. Give people the thrill of walking through the same hallways where children disappeared, the same rooms where animatronics came to life at night, the same spaces that had been the setting for unsolved murders and workplace horror stories. It was exploitation masquerading as entertainment, which is pretty on brand for a company that had spent decades covering up child murders. During the process of gathering authentic props for the attraction, the construction crew made a discovery that would have been better left buried. Behind a sealed wall in the ruins of an old Freddy's location, they found the old safe room, and intellect, but still intact enough to serve as a centerpiece for their horror attraction. They didn't know about the mummified human body still trapped inside the suit. They didn't know about the consciousness that still resided in that rotting metal and flesh shell. They just saw a scary-looking robot and thought it would be perfect for scaring customers. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 puts the player in the role of a security guard at Fazbear's Fright, and the sole real threat is Springtrap. The phantom versions of old animatronics appear as hallucinations and distractions, but they can't directly kill you. Only Springtrap can do that, and Springtrap is aggressive, intelligent, and relentless. Unlike the mindless wandering of the original possessed animatronics, Springtrap moves with purpose. He follows sounds, he tracks the player's location, and he navigates the building with an awareness that the earlier animatronics never displayed. Because Springtrap isn't just a haunted suit, he's William Afton, a serial killer with decades of experience in stalking and manipulating people, now trapped inside an indestructible mechanical body. The player character in FNAF 3 is widely believed to be Michael Afton, once again returning to the Fazbear orbit to confront his father's legacy. If this interpretation is correct, then FNAF 3 represents the first direct encounter between father and son since Michael's scooping in sister location. Both are now technically dead, both are being kept alive by supernatural forces, and both are drawn back to the same place by the unfinished business that binds them. Fazbear's fright eventually burned down. Whether the fire was set deliberately by Michael, by some other agent, or by simple accident is unclear, but the result was the same. The horror attraction was destroyed, its props and decorations reduced to ash. But Springtrap survived the fire. He always survived. That was the terrible truth about William Afton. No matter what happened to him, no matter how many times he was supposed to be destroyed, he kept coming back. Fire, decay, imprisonment, none of it was enough to stop him. This is where Henry Emily re-enters the story, and his return changes everything. Henry had been living with his guilt for decades. The murder of his daughter Charlotte, the failure of the puppet to protect her, the knowledge that his animatronic technology had been used as instruments of suffering. All of it had been eating at him for years. He had watched from the sidelines as the franchise he co-founded continued to produce victims, continued to trap souls, continued to serve as a vehicle for his ex-partner's evil. And he had finally decided that enough was enough. Henry devised a plan that was equal parts brilliant and heartbreaking. He would open one final Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, a small, modest restaurant that would serve as the culmination of everything the franchise had built. But this restaurant wasn't designed to make money or entertain children. It was designed to be a trap, a labyrinth with no exit, a gathering point for every remaining possessed entity in the FNAF universe, drawn together by the lure of the franchise name and the promise of one last gathering. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator is the game where Henry's plan unfolds, and the player takes on the role of the restaurant's manager. On the surface, the game looks like a light-hearted business sim where you build and manage a pizzeria, buying decorations, arranging furniture, and trying to pass health inspections. But underneath the cheery facade, something much darker is happening. Damaged, salvaged animatronics keep showing up in the back alley behind the restaurant, and the player is given the option to bring them inside for salvage or throw them away. These aren't random animatronics. Each one is a critical piece of the FNAF mythology, drawn to Henry's trap like moths to a flame. Scraptrap is William Afton in his battered Springtrap form, he somehow having survived the Fazbear's fright fire. Scrap Baby is Elizabeth Afton, rebuilt from the remnants of Circus Baby after being ejected from Enard. Molten Freddy is what remains of Enard after Baby's departure, a tangled mass of wires and endoskeletons carrying the spirits of the other fun-time animatronics. And Lefty is a special animatronic built by Henry himself, designed for one specific purpose, to capture and contain the puppet, which is still possessed by Charlotte Emily's spirit. Henry built Lefty to capture his own daughter's ghost. Think about that for a moment. He constructed an animatronic specifically to trap the spirit of his murdered child inside a mechanical body, not to hurt her, but to bring her to the one place where he could finally set her free. Every element of Henry's plan was calculated with the precision of an engineer and the desperation of a grieving father. When all four entities are inside the restaurant, Henry's trap springs shut. The building is revealed to be a purpose-built crematorium, a structure designed to burn hot enough and long enough to destroy every animatronic inside it and, more importantly, to neutralize the remnant that keeps the spirits trapped in the physical world. Remember those blueprints from Sister Location? The ones that noted remnant is sensitive to heat and can be permanently neutralized by overheating. Henry remembered too. His entire plan was built around that single piece of information. The completion ending of Pizzeria Simulator features Henry's monologue, one of the most powerful pieces of writing in the entire franchise. His speech begins with the words "connection terminated" and proceeds to address one by one every entity trapped in his burning restaurant. He speaks to Elizabeth Afton inside Scrap Baby, telling her that the role she was trying to play, that of continuing her father's work, was a role she was not meant to fill. He tells her it's time to rest. He speaks to the spirits inside Molten Freddy, acknowledging the pain they have suffered and the decades they have spent trapped in mechanical prisons. He tells them that this place was designed for them, not to trap them, but to finally release them. He speaks to William Afton inside Springtrap, and here his tone changes from gentle to cold. He tells William that there is a special place in hell waiting for him, and that the fire he has built is not the end of William's suffering, but the beginning. He tells his former partner that the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow him whole, and that he should not keep the devil waiting. And finally, most heartbreakingly, he speaks to Charlotte inside the puppet. He tells her location. The dead man walking who had spent years trying to atone for his family's sins finally finds rest in Henry's fire. His story, which began with an act of childhood cruelty and continued through decades of suffering and guilt, ends in an act of willing self-sacrifice. The fire was supposed to be the end of everything. Henry designed it to be definitive, to destroy every trace of the evil that Fazbear Entertainment had created. And for the spirits of the murdered children, for Charlotte and the missing 5, for Michael and Henry themselves, it was the end. Their stories concluded in that fire. Their souls were finally released from the prisons that had held them for so long. But William Afton, the man who refused to die, the consciousness that survived the Springlock failure and the Fazbear's fright fire, found a way to escape once again. Not in physical form. Something worse. Something that couldn't be burned, couldn't be crushed, couldn't be destroyed by any physical force. William Afton went digital, and the nightmare started all over again. The digital nightmare, Glitchtrap, and the corruption of Vanessa. Henry, Emily's fire was supposed to end everything. The remnant was supposed to be neutralized. The spirits were supposed to be freed. The cycle of murder and possession that had haunted Fazbear Entertainment for decades was supposed to be broken forever. And for a while, it seemed like it worked. The physical threats were gone. The animatronics were melted slag. The building was ashes. But Henry made one critical miscalculation. He assumed that William Afton's evil was contained entirely within his physical form, within the rotting corpse fused to the Springtrap suit. He didn't account for the possibility that William's consciousness could exist independently of his body, that decades of exposure to remnant and supernatural forces had transformed Afton into something that transcended physical matter entirely. When Fazbear Entertainment, somehow still operational despite everything that had happened, decided to develop a virtual reality game based on its own history, they made the catastrophic decision to scan old circuit boards and hardware from decommissioned animatronics into their digital systems. These circuit boards came from the Funtime animatronics, the ones built in Sister Location, the ones that had been designed by William Afton himself and infused with remnant from his victims, and encoded within that hardware, buried in the corrupted data like a virus waiting to activate, was something that shouldn't have been possible. William Afton's consciousness had survived the fire by embedding itself in the digital infrastructure of his own creations. Five Nights at Freddy's, Help Wanted, introduces Glitchtrap, the digital manifestation of William Afton's personality and will. Glitchtrap appears as a golden rabbit figure, reminiscent of the spring Bonnie suit that had been William's disguise for murder and later his prison. But unlike the physical Springtrap, Glitchtrap exists entirely within the virtual space of the VR game. He can't touch you, can't physically harm you, but he can do something far more dangerous. He can get inside your head. The VR game that serves as the setting for Help Wanted was developed by an indie studio contracted by Fredbear Entertainment to create a fun, unmarketable product that would reframe the company's horrifying history as harmless entertainment. The conceit is brilliant and deeply cynical. Take the real murders, the real hauntings, the real suffering that occurred at Freddy's locations across decades, and turn them into a game where players experience those events as fiction. It's the ultimate corporate whitewashing, using virtual reality to literally rewrite history and transform trauma into content. The in-game lore suggests that Fredbear Entertainment specifically commissioned the VR game as a way to discredit the real stories about their restaurants, to make people think that the murders and disappearances were just urban legends that someone turned into a spooky game. By making the truth feel like fiction, and the company could rehabilitate its image without ever having to acknowledge what actually happened. This is a brilliantly self-aware piece of writing from Scott Cawthon, because it mirrors what's happening on the meta level of the franchise itself. Five Nights at Freddy's is a game series about terrible things happening at a children's entertainment venue. Players engage with these terrible things as entertainment. The VR game within the FNAF universe serves exactly the same function, turning real horror into recreational content. The layers of irony are staggering when you think about them. We are playing a game about people playing a game about things that really happened in the game's universe. And the purpose of the game within the game is to make people believe those things didn't really happen. And it's a commentary on how media can be used to sanitize reality, and it's delivered through the very medium it's critiquing. But the developers didn't realize what they had done when they scanned those old circuit boards. They had introduced a digital predator into their system, a consciousness with decades of experience in manipulation, and an intimate understanding of how fear and vulnerability work. Glitchtrap didn't immediately reveal himself. He was patient, as William had always been patient when stalking his victims. He lurked in the code, observing, learning, waiting for the right moment and the right target. That target was Vanessa. Vanessa was a beta tester for the VR game, and she had exactly the kind of psychological profile that a predator like William Afton would know how to exploit. Therapy session notes scattered throughout Security Breach reveal that Vanessa suffered from anxiety, depression, and unresolved trauma that she had compartmentalized rather than processed. She was vulnerable, she was lonely, and she was spending hours inside a virtual reality environment that contained a digital predator specifically designed to find and exploit weaknesses in human psychology. Glitchtrap's corruption of Vanessa was gradual and insidious. He didn't announce himself as a dead serial killer living in a computer program. He insinuated himself into her consciousness slowly, appearing as a friendly figure in the VR space, building trust, establishing a connection. By the time Vanessa realized something was wrong, it was too late. Glitchtrap had already established a foothold in her mind and his influence grew stronger with each session she spent in the game. The specifics of how Glitchtrap's possession works are deliberately left ambiguous by the games, but the effect is clear. Vanessa developed a split personality. During the day, she was Vanessa, a security guard at the new Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, going about her duties, interacting with co-workers, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But at night, she became Vanny, short for Vanessa plus Bunny, a figure in a handmade rabbit costume who carried out Glitchtrap's commands while in what appeared to be a dissociative state. The rabbit costume is a deeply unsettling detail. Vanessa, under Glitchtrap's influence, sewed herself a white bunny mask and outfit that deliberately echoed the spring bonnie suit that William Afton had worn during his murders. She was becoming a new version of the Golden Rabbit, a human proxy for a digital ghost, continuing William's work in a new form. The cycle that Henry tried to break was starting again, but this time the killer wasn't inside an animatronic suit. The suit was just a costume, and the person wearing it was a victim who had been programmed to kill by a consciousness that refused to die. Some of the most disturbing details about Vanessa come from the therapy session notes and emails found throughout Security Breach. Her therapist recognized that something was deeply wrong, that Vanessa was exhibiting signs of external influence or programming, but they were unable to help her. The sessions paint a picture of a woman losing control of her own mind, aware on some level that she was being manipulated, but unable to resist the force acting on her. One particularly chilling detail from the collectible retro CDs is that Vanessa's father was apparently named Bill, a shortened form of William. While the theory that Vanessa is directly related to William Afton remains unconfirmed, the coincidence is too pointed to ignore. But here's where things get even more unsettling. A later therapist discovers major inconsistencies in Vanessa's story, suggesting that her memories of an abusive father named Bill may not be real at all. The possibility that Glitchtrap implanted false memories of trauma and abuse to make Vanessa more susceptible to manipulation is perhaps the most disturbing interpretation, because it means William Afton's digital ghost didn't just control Vanessa's actions. He rewrote her entire past, manufacturing a childhood connection to himself that may never have existed. And the transformation from Vanessa to Vanny represents one of the franchise's most sophisticated explorations of its central themes. In the earlier games, possession was straightforward. A child was killed, their spirit entered an animatronic, and the animatronic became haunted. But Glitchtrap's possession of Vanessa is psychological rather than supernatural. He didn't stuff her body into a suit. He infiltrated her mind through digital technology and exploited her pre-existing mental health vulnerabilities to create a willing, or at least compliant, instrument of his will. It's a form of abuse that maps uncomfortably well onto real-world patterns of grooming and psychological manipulation, where predators identify vulnerable individuals and systematically break down their resistance until the victim becomes dependent on and obedient to their abuser. Vanny's mission, as directed by Glitchtrap, was twofold. First, she was to continue the work of gathering remnant, which meant targeting children. The disappearances that would later be mentioned in Security Breach were her handiwork, children lured away inside the Mega Pizzaplex by a woman in a rabbit costume, who they probably thought was just another friendly mascot. Second, and perhaps more ambitiously, Vanny was working to rebuild a physical body for William Afton. She excavated the old pizzeria beneath the Mega Pizzaplex, the same location where Henry's fire had burned, and attempted to reconstruct Springtrap from the charred remains found in the ruins. And this reconstructed form, known as Burntrap, would serve as Glitchtrap's physical vessel, allowing William Afton to once again walk the earth in a mechanical body. Vanny also reprogrammed the Glamrock animatronics at the Mega Pizzaplex, corrupting their systems so that they would serve Glitchtrap's agenda rather than their original entertainment purpose. Glamrock Chica, Roxanne Wolf, and Montgomery Gaita all became hostile, not because they were possessed by ghosts like the original animatronics, but because their software had been tampered with by a human agent working for a digital predator. Only Glamrock Freddy, the star of the Mega Pizzaplex, seemed resistant to the reprogramming, and he would become the unlikely hero of the next chapter in the story. The existence of Glitchtrap raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness, evil, and identity in the FNAF universe. Is Glitchtrap actually William Afton, his genuine consciousness preserved in digital form? Or is Glitchtrap something else, perhaps the mimic from 1979, doing what it has always done, mimicking the most dangerous personality it ever encountered? If the mimic theory holds, then the entity corrupting Vanessa isn't William Afton at all, but a machine that learned to be evil by observing a master of evil. The distinction matters philosophically, but in practical terms, the result is the same. Something wearing William Afton's personality is still out there, still killing, still refusing to stay dead, and still finding new ways to continue the cycle of suffering that began decades ago. Our Help Wanted also introduced the Princess Quest minigame, a retro-style adventure game hidden within the VR experience. Princess Quest would later become critically important in Security Breach, where completing all 3 Princess Quest arcade cabinets triggers what many consider the true ending of the game. In that ending, the princess, representing Vanessa's uncorrupted consciousness, defeats Glitchtrap within the digital realm, freeing Vanessa from his control. It's a metaphor for overcoming psychological abuse, for reclaiming your own mind from a predator who invaded it, and it's one of the few genuinely hopeful moments in the entire franchise. But hope in the FNAF universe is always fragile, always conditional, and always temporary. Glitchtrap may have been defeated in one battle, but the war against William Afton's legacy was far from over. Security Breach, One Night in the Mega Pizzaplex. The Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex is the most ambitious venue in Fazbear Entertainment's long and bloody history. Imagine the biggest, most elaborate entertainment center you've ever seen. A shopping mall crossed with an amusement park crossed with a concert venue. All themed around the Freddy Fazbear brand and staffed by a new generation of animatronic performers called the Glamrock animatronics. Glamrock Freddy, Glamrock Chica, Roxanne Wolf, and Montgomery Gaita are flashy, modern, and designed to appeal to a new generation of children who have no memory of the missing kids, or the closed restaurants, or the fires that burned away the franchise's darkest chapters. The Pizzaplex is built on top of the ruins of Henry's Trap and the Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator location, where the final fire was supposed to end everything. This detail is crucial because it means the physical remnants of every horror in the franchise's history are literally beneath the feet of the children playing in the Pizzaplex above. The charred remains of Springtrap, the melted components of Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, the ashes of Henry's Trap. All of it is down there, buried but not destroyed, waiting to be disturbed by anyone curious or desperate enough to dig. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach puts the player in control of Gregory, a young boy who finds himself trapped inside the Mega Pizzaplex. After closing time, Gregory's backstory is deliberately vague, but the game drops strong hints that he's a homeless child who snuck into the Pizzaplex seeking shelter and food. In one of the game's endings, Gregory doesn't go home after escaping. Instead, he sleeps in an alley, huddled inside a cardboard box. This kid doesn't have a home to go to. He entered the Pizzaplex because it was warm and there was food, and he had no idea that he was walking into a building that concealed decades of murder beneath its glittering floors. What makes Security Breach unique in the FNAF franchise is the relationship between Gregory and Glamrock Freddy. In every previous FNAF game, the animatronics were threats. They hunted you, they chased you, and if they caught you, they killed you. Glamrock Freddy breaks this pattern entirely. When he discovers Gregory hiding inside his chest cavity during a show, Freddy doesn't attack. Instead, he helps. He becomes Gregory's protector, his guide through the dangerous Pizzaplex, and his ally against the other corrupted animatronics and the mysterious figure in the rabbit costume who stalks the halls after dark. The reason for Glamrock Freddy's unique behavior is one of the game's central mysteries. The most popular theory is that Freddy is possessed by a benevolent spirit, possibly Michael Afton himself, whose consciousness somehow survived the fire in Pizzeria Simulator and migrated to a new animatronic body. If Michael's spirit is inside Glamrock Freddy, then his decision to protect Gregory represents the culmination of his decades-long arc of atonement. The boy who caused his brother's death in the bite of 83 is now a guardian angel for a different vulnerable child, using the same kind of mechanical body that once imprisoned murdered souls to instead save a life. Our Gregory's night in the Pizzaplex is a survival gauntlet, unlike anything in the previous games. Instead of sitting in a security office and monitoring cameras, Gregory physically explores the massive building, avoiding or confronting the corrupted Glamrock animatronics in different zones. Glamrock Chica patrols the food court and kitchen areas, driven by her corrupted programming to obsessively consume garbage and attack anyone she encounters. Montgomery Gator prowls the bowling alley and mechanical areas, aggressive and territorial. Roxanne Wolf hunts through the raceway and backstage areas, her enhanced vision making her particularly dangerous in open spaces. Each animatronic has a unique weakness and a corresponding boss encounter, where Gregory must decommission them by removing or destroying their special components. Our Chica's voice box is destroyed. Monty is dropped into an acid pit. Roxy's eyes are taken and given to Freddy as an upgrade. These encounters are violent and intense, and they carry an uncomfortable weight when you remember that the corrupted animatronics aren't evil. They've been reprogrammed by Vanny. Before the corruption, they were performers who entertained children and brought joy to families. Destroying them isn't a victory. It's a tragedy. Another instance of innocent machines being sacrificed because of William Afton's influence. As Gregory explores the Pizzaplex, he uncovers layers of the building's hidden history through emails, messages, and recordings left behind by employees and visitors. These documents paint a disturbing picture of a company that has learned nothing from its past. Security concerns are ignored. Employee complaints about strange behavior by the animatronics are dismissed. Reports of missing children in the area around the Pizzaplex are brushed aside. Fazbear Entertainment is doing what it has always done, prioritizing profits over safety and hoping that the bad things happening in and around its venues will somehow resolve themselves without corporate intervention. The game features multiple endings that provide different levels of resolution and different amounts of lore. The simplest ending has Gregory fleeing the Pizzaplex at 6 a.m., without resolving any of the major plot threads, leaving Vanny at large and Glitchtrap's influence intact. The fire escape ending sees Freddy sacrificing himself to push Vanny off the roof, killing both of them but leaving the underlying threat unresolved. The disassemble Vanny ending results in Vanny's defeat, but Freddy's destruction. The ending most widely considered canon is the one achieved by completing all 3 Princess Quest arcade cabinets scattered throughout the Pizzaplex. In this ending, Gregory plays through the retro-style games that represent Vanessa's psychological battle against Glitchtrap's control. When the princess defeats the glitching golden rabbit in the 3rd game, Vanessa is freed from Glitchtrap's influence. The final image of this ending shows Gregory, Glamrock Freddy's detached head, and a freed Vanessa sitting together on a hillside, watching the sunset and eating ice cream. It's one of the few genuinely peaceful moments in the entire franchise, a brief respite from the relentless horror that has defined every other chapter of the story. But there's also the after ending, the one that takes Gregory and Freddy beneath the Pizzaplex into the ruins of the old pizzeria. Down there, in the charred remains of Henry's trap, they find Burntrap, the reconstructed body of Springtrap that Vanny had been building for Glitchtrap. The final confrontation takes place in the ruins of the very location where Henry tried to end everything, and the symbolism is impossible to miss. The fire didn't work. William Afton, or whatever is using his identity, has returned to the site of his supposed destruction and is preparing to walk the earth again. The Ruin DLC, released after the main game, continues the story with a new protagonist named Cassie, who enters the now abandoned Pizzaplex searching for Gregory, who has sent out a distress signal. The DLC introduces the Mimic as an active antagonist, connecting the events of Security Breach directly to the 1979 origins established in Secret of the Mimic. The Mimic has been mimicking Gregory's voice to lure Cassie into the ruins, and the DLC ends with the revelation that the entity below the Pizzaplex may not be William Afton at all, but the Mimic, the ancient prototype endoskeleton that can become anyone and anything it observes. The Ruin DLC also deepens our understanding of what happened to the Pizzaplex after the events of the main game. The building is in ruins, abandoned and overgrown. Its once bright neon signs dark and its corridors filled with debris. The Glamrock animatronics have been shattered and rebuilt in disturbing new configurations, their parts mixed and matched in ways that suggest someone or something has been experimenting with them in the time since Gregory's escape. The daycare attendant, a split personality animatronic that alternated between a cheerful sun form and a menacing moon form in the main game, has been fused into a single entity called Eclipse, representing the merger of its 2 halves into something new and unsettling. Cassie navigates the destroyed Pizzaplex using a special Vanny mask that allows her to see in augmented reality, overlaying a bright, cheerful version of the building on top of its actual devastated state. This mechanic is a perfect metaphor for how Fazbear Entertainment has always operated, projecting a cheerful facade over the genuine horror underneath. When Cassie removes the mask, she sees the building as it truly is, dark, broken, and dangerous. When she puts it on, she sees the corporate illusion, the version of reality that Fazbear Entertainment wants people to believe in. The climax of Ruin reveals that the Gregory voice guiding Cassie was never Gregory at all. It was the Mimic, using its ability to copy and replicate the voices and behaviors of others to lure Cassie deeper into the ruins. This revelation connects directly to the Mimic's origins in 1979. closing a narrative loop that spans the entire franchise. The same technology that Edwin Murray created in his Costume Manor, the endoskeleton that could become anyone, has been active beneath the Pizzaplex, learning, adapting, and drawing new victims into its domain. This connection between the Mimic and Glitchtrap represents the franchise's most ambitious narrative thread, a storyline that spans from 1979 to the 2030s and connects the very first threat in the FNAF universe to its most recent one. If the Mimic and Glitchtrap are the same entity, or if the Mimic has been impersonating William Afton's digital ghost, then the entire post-Pizzeria Simulator arc of the franchise takes on a new meaning. It means that the evil haunting the Mega Pizzaplex isn't the ghost of a dead serial killer. It's something older, something more primal, a machine that learned to be evil by watching the worst person in the world and then decided to continue his work long after he was truly gone. The full picture. Every thread connected when you step back and look at the complete FNAF timeline from 1979 to the events of Security Breach and beyond. And what emerges is something far more complex and far more disturbing than a simple story about haunted animatronics at a pizza restaurant. This is a generational saga about the consequences of unchecked ambition, corporate negligence, and the way evil perpetuates itself across time and through different mediums. The timeline follows a consistent pattern that repeats across decades. Someone builds something designed to entertain children. That creation is corrupted or exploited for dark purposes. Children suffer and die. The company covers up the tragedy. A new location opens. The cycle begins again. From Fredbear's family diner to the Mega Pizzaplex, from spring-lock suits to digital VR environments, the specific technologies change, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. A Fazbear Entertainment creates spaces where children are supposed to be safe, and those spaces become places where children are victimized. At the center of this cycle is the figure of William Afton, whose evolution across the timeline mirrors the evolution of the threats in the franchise. He begins as a human being, a businessman with dark impulses, and ends as something that transcends human form entirely. He's a physical killer who becomes a physical ghost trapped in a suit, who then becomes a digital consciousness, who then becomes a corrupting influence that operates through other people's minds. Each transformation makes him harder to fight, harder to contain, and harder to destroy. Henry's fire eliminated the physical threat, but the digital threat, as the virus of William Afton's personality encoded into the very technology he helped create, proved impossible to burn away. The theme of Remnant runs through the entire franchise as both a plot device and a metaphor. Remnant is the spiritual energy that allows souls to persist after death, binding them to physical objects. In practical terms, it's what makes the animatronics haunted. But metaphorically, Remnant represents the way trauma persists, the way suffering doesn't just disappear when the event that caused it is over. The children murdered by William Afton left behind a remnant of their pain that infected every machine it touched, turning entertainment into horror and joy into suffering. Decades after their deaths, their pain was still echoing through the franchise, still shaping events, still causing harm. And William's own remnant, the residue of his evil, proved to be the most persistent of all, surviving fires and digital purges and the passage of decades. The Afton family itself serves as a microcosm of the franchise's broader themes. William, the patriarch, was the source of evil. His children were its first victims. Michael, the eldest, spent his entire existence trying to undo his father's damage and atone for his own role in his brother's death. Elizabeth, trapped inside Baby, became an echo of her father's cruelty, a child who was murdered by her parents' creation, and then, in death, continued the cycle of violence he started. The crying child, the youngest, was collateral damage in every sense, killed not by his father directly, but by the toxic family dynamics that William's evil created. And even after all of them were dead, and their stories continued to intertwine with the franchise's history, their remnants shaping events long after their physical forms were gone. What makes the Afton family story so compelling is that each member represents a different response to the trauma of living with a monster. Michael chose guilt and atonement, dedicating his existence after death to undoing his father's crimes. Elizabeth chose imitation, whether consciously or through the corrupting influence of Baby's programming, and became a version of the predator who killed her. The crying child chose fear, the paralyzing, all-consuming terror of a child who knows something is deeply wrong, but cannot articulate what it is or protect himself from it. And William's unknown wife, whose absence from the story is itself telling, chose to disappear entirely, leaving the narrative before any of the worst events occurred. Each response is human, each is understandable, and each ultimately fails to break the cycle that William set in motion. The question of William Afton's motivation has been debated since the earliest days of the franchise. Was he always evil, born with a predator's instincts that he eventually stopped suppressing? Was he corrupted by the technology he helped create, by his exposure to Remnant and the supernatural forces that his animatronics awakened? Or was it simpler than that? A man consumed by the desire for immortality, who was willing to sacrifice anyone and anything, including his own children, in pursuit of that goal. The games never give a definitive answer, and that ambiguity is part of what makes William such an effective villain. He's not a cartoon monster with a simple motivation. He's a person who made choices, terrible choices, over and over again, each one taking him further from anything recognizable as human decency. Henry Emily represents the franchise's tragic conscience. He built the technology that made everything possible. He created the puppet that would become the instrument of possession. He co-founded the company that provided the setting for William's crimes. And when the full weight of those consequences became clear, he spent the rest of his life trying to fix it, ultimately sacrificing himself in a fire designed to end the suffering once and for all. Henry's arc is the arc of a man who discovers that his greatest creative achievements have been turned into instruments of horror, and who cannot live with that knowledge without taking action. The corporate entity of Fazbear Entertainment is arguably as villainous as William Afton himself. At every stage of the timeline, the company chose profits over safety, chose cover-ups over accountability, and chose to reopen haunted restaurants rather than face the truth about what was happening inside them. The company knew about the missing children, knew about the animatronic malfunctions, knew about the deaths and injuries, and at every turn, it chose to look the other way. Fazbear Entertainment didn't create the evil that haunted its restaurants, but it provided the perfect environment for that evil to thrive, and it actively prevented anyone from stopping it. The introduction of the Mimic as the franchise's deepest threat adds a final unsettling layer to the timeline. If the Mimic predates William Afton's crimes, if it was the original dangerous technology that Fazbear Entertainment sought to acquire and exploit, then the entire history of the franchise is built on a foundation of corporate greed and technological hubris that goes back even further than William's first murder. The company was reaching for dangerous technology from the very beginning, and every horror that followed was a consequence of that initial decision to pursue the mimic's adaptive endoskeleton without fully understanding or controlling its potential for harm. The FNAF timeline is also a story about how information travels and how truth gets buried. Scott Cawthon deliberately scattered his story across games, hiding critical details in minigames, Easter eggs, and background clues that required the collective effort of millions of fans to piece together. And this isn't just a creative choice. It's a reflection of the story's themes. In the world of FNAF, the truth about what happened at Freddy's was always there, hidden in police reports and news articles and employee testimonials, but it was buried by corporate cover-ups and public indifference. The real timeline of events was never supposed to be seen, because Fazbear Entertainment worked tirelessly to ensure that it wouldn't be. The act of piecing together the FNAF lore mirrors the act of investigative journalism, of digging through corporate records and sealed files to find the truth that powerful institutions would prefer to keep hidden. Scott Cawthon's approach to storytelling is genuinely unprecedented in gaming. He released the first 5 Nights at Freddy's in August 2014, and within months, he had released a sequel that retroactively reframed the events of the first game. FNAF 2 wasn't a sequel at all. It was a prequel, set in 1987, before the events of the original game. This single revelation forced the entire community to reconsider everything they thought they understood about the story. It was the first of many times that a new FNAF release would fundamentally change the interpretation of previous entries, and it established a pattern that continues to this day. Each subsequent game added new pieces to the puzzle, while simultaneously creating new questions. FNAF 3 introduced Springtrap and the Springlock suits. FNAF 4 gave us the Bite of 83 and the Crying Child. Sister Location revealed the underground facility and the Funtime animatronics. Pizzeria Simulator provided Henry's Trap and the completion ending. A Help Wanted introduced Glitchtrap and the digital threat. Security Breach gave us the Mega Pizzaplex and Gregory. And Secret of the Mimic pushed the timeline all the way back to 1979 with Edwin Murray and his prototype endoskeleton. Every single entry changed the shape of the timeline, forced fans to revise their theories, and revealed that the story was even bigger and more connected than anyone had previously imagined. The supplementary materials, the novels, the Fazbear Frights short stories, and the tales from the Pizzaplex series add enormous depth to the timeline without always being directly canonical to the games. Scott Cawthon described the books as existing in a parallel universe that shares key elements with the game timeline, meaning that the events in the books aren't exactly what happened in the games, but illuminate the same themes and reveal details about the same characters. The Silver Eyes trilogy introduces alternative versions of characters like Charlie and William Afton. The Fazbear Fright stories explore the broader mythology of Remnant and Possession. And the tales from the Pizzaplex series introduced the Mimic before the character appeared in the games, providing essential context for understanding the secret of the Mimic's story. The community's response to this narrative structure has been remarkable. YouTube channels like The Game Theorist built enormous audiences around the project of decoding FNAF lore, with MatPat's FNAF theory videos accumulating over 800 million combined views across more than 60 episodes. Reddit forums, Discord servers, and dedicated wikis have catalogued every known detail of the timeline, every piece of evidence for competing theories, and every unresolved mystery that future games might address. The FNAF fandom isn't just consuming a story, it's actively constructing it, debating its meaning, and testing its internal consistency in ways that few other franchises have ever inspired. What makes this story endure? What makes people come back to it year after year and game after game? Is that underneath all the jump scares and the creepy pasta aesthetics and the puzzle box narrative structure, there's a genuinely moving story about grief, guilt, loss, and the desperate desire to protect the people you love. Henry wanted to protect Charlotte. Michael wanted to protect his brother. Glamrock Freddy wanted to protect Gregory. The puppet, he even in its haunted form, wanted to protect the children it watched over. At every level of the FNAF timeline, the most powerful motivating force isn't evil, it's love, and the terrible things that happen when love isn't enough to keep the people you care about safe. The FNAF franchise has sold tens of millions of copies across its games. It has spawned 2 feature films, with the first becoming Blumhouse Productions' highest-grossing film worldwide, with nearly $300 million at the box office. The second film released in December 2025. There are novels, graphic novels, an enormous fan community, and a cultural footprint that extends far beyond the gaming audience. Five Nights at Freddy's has become one of the defining horror franchises of the 21st century, and the timeline we've explored today is the reason why. It's not just scary, it's sad, it's complex, it's layered, and it rewards every hour you spend peeling back its layers with new revelations that change how you understand everything that came before. The timeline we were never supposed to see isn't hidden because someone wanted to keep it secret. It's hidden because seeing it all at once, understanding the full scope of what happened across 5 decades of murder and possession and corporate negligence and desperate, doomed attempts at redemption, is almost too much to take in. When you play FNAF 1 by itself, you're having a fun, scary time trying to survive until 6 a.m. When you play it with the full knowledge of who Michael Afton is, why the animatronics are hunting him, what's sealed in the walls of the back room, and what will eventually happen to everyone involved, you're experiencing something much heavier. The jump scares are still there, but they carry the weight of decades of suffering behind them. The call to the community. And that's the full FNAF timeline as we understand it today. From the Mimic's creation in 1979 to the events beneath the Mega Pizzaplex in the 2030s. Over 50 years of horror, tragedy, and the stubborn refusal of both good and evil to stay dead. But here's the thing. This timeline isn't finished. Five Nights at Freddy's is still an evolving franchise, and every new game, every new book, every new piece of media has the potential to change how we understand the events we've discussed today. The Secret of the Mimic already pushed the timeline back by several years and introduced an entirely new origin point for the franchise's central technology. Future installments could do the same, adding new layers to an already impossibly complex narrative. That's what makes FNAF special. It's not a story that was told once and then set in stone. It's a living, evolving mythology that the community participates in building and interpreting. Every fan theory, every late-night discussion about timeline inconsistencies, every attempt to connect seemingly unrelated details across different games, all of it contributes to our collective understanding of this universe. The timeline we explored today is the product of millions of hours of collective detective work by fans who refuse to accept surface-level explanations for the mysteries Scott Cawthon planted in his games. If you learned something new about the FNAF timeline from this video, or if you see connections that we missed, drop a comment below and let us know. This community is the reason we can do deep dives like this, and we love hearing from you about the lore that keeps you up at night. If you want to see more comprehensive breakdowns of gaming and animation lore, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new video from the Cartoon Codex. Thank you for sticking with us through this entire deep dive. We know it was a long one, but the FNAF timeline deserves nothing less than the full treatment. The children trapped in those machines waited decades for someone to tell their story. The least we can do is tell it right. We will see you in the next one.